We're silly playing with fire. But again, it's fire that somebody like Trump and his group don't seem to really understand that
Mm.
well.
Now, let's go to an economist's perspective and say hello to James Heckman, who's a Nobel laureate in economics and a professor at the University of Chicago. Welcome to you, Professor.
Well, nice talking to you again.
It's lovely to have you back on the show. What's your thought on the no longer called Big Beautiful Bill from an economist's perspective?
Well, first of all, it's not a single issue bill. There are a number of issues that were raised by your previous speaker and that would actually characterize any analysis of this bill. There really is an issue concerning Medicaid, which is a big political hot potato. There's a lot of discussion that's connected with the misrepresentation of the deficit by the Congressional Budget Office, depending on the baseline that's actually used to compute the deficit generating properties of this bill. And so at this point, I think the general public is very confused, and I'm not entirely sure that polls on this matter are all that informative on this issue.
Mm.
Precisely as your previous speaker was saying, there are just so many, running parts, moving parts in this bill that nobody really sees it as a whole. I'm not even sure Trump sees it as a whole.
Mm.
He sees it as a personal uh, statement of his personal honor and how much he can push this way through the House and the Senate. But so in terms of pure economics, I mean, one of the really critical points has been raised by good economists. It's in the Wall Street Journal and it's in most technical economic analyses of this, is this $3.3 trillion figure comes because of the way the tax cuts the 2017 tax cuts being preserved or not is treated in the analysis. And so that's a complete misrepresentation. Nobody really thinks that item of 3.3 trillion is at all relevant. So that's a matter, it's kind of a red herring in this discussion.
Mm.
The issue of work requirements is an old issue, and the question about the expansion of the welfare state is kind of a reversion of the Republicans back to kind of an older mode of analysis, thinking about the future of the balanced budget. We've seen under the first Trump administration big deficits, and this is going to contribute to a deficit as well,
Yes.
although not to the scale of 3.3 trillion.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are various estimates, aren't there, on the deficits, the deficits
Correct,
that
and
are
they're
going to
not
be
even
generated.
correctly well. As I said, they're not really looking at what the proper baseline is, and they're not accounting for any growth inducing properties of this bill. I'm not saying that the Trump administration or any of the proponents have really provided strong advocacy other than just round numbers about
Yes,
how this bill will stimulate U.S. economic growth and therefore contribute to government revenue.
right. So
So
look,
I would say this is another case, which you've seen a lot of in the United States, of legislation with profound economic
yes.
consequences, at least potentially profound, without any knowledge base whatsoever.
Right. So to put that another way, there may be some benign effect from the tax cuts in terms of generating economic growth. Hard to know that we don't
Yes.
know. We don't know the scale of the burden, the extra burden on the United States deficit that would come from this bill. But we can look at the plausible possibility of the deficit rising over a period of years by some trillions of dollars. Now, even given the American economy is strong, even given that the dollar is strong, we are looking at a big gamble, aren't we?
Yes, we are. And I think this is a case where now partisan politics are playing out in a particularly malign way, where we're finding both Republicans and Democrats sticking their head in the sand. And when you look at the long-term consequences of these legislation, you can argue over a trillion here or a trillion there, but there's this massive deficit which we face, and the interest payments on those
Mm,
are compromising the ability to innovate and to spend on new programs
mm,
and tackle real problems. So the level of discussion is particularly low. I'm surprised at how low it is. I think some of it is fear that people, certainly the Republicans, are fearful of Trump. But I also think that the Democrats have kind of tried to cast this as a class issue and saying we're getting us all this for, cut Medicare and we want to give the money to the billionaires. And again, it's kind of a crude classist war, which I don't think is at all accurate. Nobody ever looks at the question of what the contribution is of these high income tax payers to capital formation and to economic growth. I mean, it's pretty well documented statements. Now, the magnitude of what will happen 2 years from now, I don't know. And I don't know anybody who would actually say seriously, but the numbers are tossed around as if they're well known, and we're able to really predict these things in a precise way.
Yeah, I think we're getting clearly your view that the economic thinking behind these reforms is pretty much absent. It's certainly incoherent. And when you lay it over the another feud between the president and the chair of the Federal Reserve, the president wants to see large, quick cuts in interest rates. The chairman of the Fed does not want that. He's much more cautious. It again makes the whole thing look so much more concerning.
Well, I think in that case, when you look at the fact that Trump is willing to play with the Federal Reserve, and more than just the specifics of whether or not the interest rate should go down, I mean, that's going to be a bonus to actually a lot of low-end housing issues and the purchase of housing stock that's really slowed down in many areas. Not all, by any means, but certainly that's an issue. It's a burning issue and a lot of questions, even questions we wouldn't even think about normally, like fertility decline. But more importantly, the discussion is not being conducted in a way that recognizes the danger in violating the autonomy of the Federal Reserve. When it was set up more than 100 years ago now, the goal was to try to preserve it as an independent agency operating on behalf of the welfare of the American economy. And the Trump administration has actually then here in this place and many others taken a very activist role in trying to overturn some of these, or at least eliminate the power of certain institutions. In this case, the Fed. And I think it's dangerous. It weakens the concept of American stability. We know that there are huge holdings of U.S. assets abroad. And a large part of that is because of confidence in the way the American financial markets have operated traditionally. Now, if we tamper with those, we're silly playing with fire. But again, it's fire that somebody like Trump and his group don't seem to really understand that well.
Yeah, well, the chairman of the Fed is standing his ground, isn't he, so far, and shows no sign of ceasing to do that. But extraordinary situation. So good to get your thoughts, Professor James Heckman at Chicago University. Thank you. Let's find out, if we can, what the American people think, because Charles Franklin, who's director of the Marquette Law School poll, has joined us. Welcome to you, Charles.
Good to be with you, John.
Hi, good to have you there. So we heard the president's passion for this bill, and there were reservations among his colleagues in both houses of Congress. But what about the American people? Is it right to say this legislation is not especially popular?
It's quite unpopular. Across 5 different polls done in the last week or so, it's been more unpopular than approved, more opposed than approved, by around 20 to 25% margin. That's a big margin against it. At the same time, you have to appreciate that a lot of people don't have much information about what exactly is in the bill. And so when you go through the individual provisions, you got an awful lot of people saying they don't know or haven't heard enough. Still, the broad sweep will be general opposition to budget cuts and general support for tax cuts.
Yeah.
Not a way to balance the budget, among other things.
No, people like to have their cake and eat it as a general rule, don't they? And the views on the bill, presumably this crosses party lines among voters to an extent.
It does, but opposition for somewhat different reasons. Republicans are more concerned about the budget deficit and whether this bill is cutting enough. Democrats oppose some, but not all, of the tax cuts, while generally being opposed to cuts on Medicaid, which is our health insurance for lower income people, but also rollbacks in food assistance and in green energy programs.
I mean, the president, he is betting the farm politically on this bill, on this legislation, on these reforms, which is interesting, isn't it, considering the depth of opposition out there in the in the country among the American public. And those worries about cuts in Medicaid, medical insurance, that's worrying some members of the Republican Party very seriously on Capitol Hill.
Quite a bit. And one of the interesting changes is that as Trump has drawn more and more support from lower income voters, that's become more of a problem for the Republican Party because large percentages of the population in Republican leaning states benefit from the Medicaid program and the food assistance program. And a number of big energy producing states like Texas actually have a thriving green energy
Yes.
industry that's being threatened by this. So there is Republican opposition. We've seen the negotiations over the last month shifting the balance a little bit on some of these, including changes to how much green energy will be affected. But there is that opposition within the party.
Yes.
That said, most of those senators Republican senators who had expressed reservations did find a way to vote for the bill today.
Yes. I would have found how much that has to do with the pressure they're under, the danger of reprisals if they don't support the bill. And on the other side, of course, you've now got Elon Musk, Charles, who is threatening all sorts of punishment for Republicans and others who may vote for the bill, threatening to set up his own party. I don't know what chance an Elon Musk-created American party might have, but denying the Republicans the benefit of his enormous wealth, that would also hurt.
It certainly could. He's threatened to support candidates to run in primaries against incumbent senators who voted for the bill today. We'll see if that comes through. But when push comes to shove, despite Musk's enormous money, Donald Trump still has far greater leverage over Republican elected officials than Elon Musk does. That's why this bill will almost certainly end up passing. Now, it does have to still go to the House of Representatives, who have to vote on it with the changes that the Senate imposed. And the House just barely passed the bill before. That'll be a tough battle as well. Still, in the end, presidents of their own party almost always get what they want from their majorities in the Congress.
All right, Charles, great to talk to you as always. Charles Franklin from the Marquette Law School poll.